January 2016. So our first forum session for the new calendar year. Today we are fortunate to have Brian Cosgrove of the National Water Center present a talk on hydrologic modeling at the National Water Center and the operational implementation of the WRF-Hydro model. So we haven't had a lot of wet side talks here at the VLab Forum, so we're really glad that Brian could make it. And just to remind everyone, our format here is about 30 minutes or so of presentation, and we'll follow that up with question and answer. Please use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to ask a question of Brian, or use the chat function as well. And also a reminder that this session will be recorded and uploaded to the VLab Forum website shortly after the conclusion of the session. Also a reminder that John Chattel is manning the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar and will be the one who will be looking for your raised hands in that feature. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to give this talk. Appreciate the invitation. As was just mentioned, I'll be talking about the WRF-Hydro model today, which is the new national water model that we're implementing at the National Water Center. And first and foremost, I want to talk about how it's been really a collaborative project between us at the Water Center and people at NCAR. NCAR, in fact, are the ones who developed this community model, this WRF-Hydro model. And there's quite a large integrated team both at the Water Center and NCAR that's been working on this effort. And we've been collaborating quite extensively with NCEPS as well. So next slide. Okay, so just an outline of what I'll be talking about today. I'll be going through the growing need for actionable hydrologic information. I'll give a brief overview of what WRF-Hydro is. We'll talk about the model configuration, basically how we've set it up for operation on the NOAA supercomputer. Talk a bit about version control, how we're using VLab. Talk about products and data dissemination, and also go through the various end users that we expect will be accessing and using this model output. We'll go very briefly through some initial validation examples just to illustrate the types of analyses that we'll be doing in the future. And finally, I'll finish up with the summary and future directions. Okay, so we all know that the hydrologic analysis and forecasting needs are extremely broad. They're not just limited to information about floods, but we also need information about droughts, water quality, snowpack, coastal total water level, which would be the combined influence of flooding fresh water coming out of the rivers combined with maybe incoming storm surge from a hurricane. That kind of produces a greater flooding event. We also need to know about water supply and low flow issues. So it's quite a broad spectrum of issues that we really need some critical guidance on. Now, this isn't completely useful information in terms of being able to guide us in the development of a tool or to assess whether we have the proper tools to provide that information. We need to drill down a bit further and get more specific. And so in an effort to do this, the National Water Center over the past year or two has conducted various stakeholder summits, river basin commission meetings. We've examined weather service assessments, talked to FEMA, emergency managers, and all of this is kind of outlined here on this ring. And this is basically, you'd say, a ring of requirements. From all of those different meetings has emerged this selection of basic requirements that a hydrologic system, a hydrologic analysis and forecasting system would need to have in order to provide the information that our end users need. I'd like to note that we do have bits and pieces of these requirements represented in current tools, but no current weather service system integrates all these together and satisfies all of these. And what we'll see in this presentation is that this new national hydrologic modeling system called WRF-Hydro, when it's implemented at NWS operations in June, is going to start beginning to fill these gaps in a holistic fashion. It's not going to do it all at once, but it's going to give us a firm foundation upon which to build on and slowly but surely integrate all these together and be able to provide the output and guidance that we need. So what are we aiming for in terms of initial operating capability, or IOC? I mentioned that the model is going to be implemented in June of this year, and all of those requirements, those are goals that will eventually be met, that we're striving for, but they won't be met on day one. Instead, we're focusing on implementing a capable and solid foundation. This is something that can grow, something that we can iterate on year over year and increase our operational hydrologic forecasting capability. And in terms of this foundation, this IOC, what do we want it to do? Well, at its core, we want to provide forecast streamflow guidance for underserved locations. So by that I mean we have around 3,600 locations that are currently available in terms of Weather Service river forecast locations. And these are skillful locations. They offer a good wealth of information. But unfortunately, that leaves out a good chunk of the country that doesn't have a river forecast guidance point near it. So you may find yourself 50 miles or more away from a forecast point. There are many, many streams, of course, that exist, smaller ones, bigger ones, outside of these forecast points. And we would like to provide some guidance about those currently underserved areas. Beyond streamflow, we're also seeking to provide spatially continuous national estimates of hydrologic states like soil moisture, snowpack, etc. So quite often we may have, again, bits and pieces of this where we have regional estimates of some of these quantities, but what we want to do are to eliminate the boundaries and provide a kind of a seamless picture, a snapshot of the nation's hydrologic condition, both in an analysis sense as well as a forecast sense. We're going to be interfacing these hydrologic output products in a seamless fashion into advanced geospatial intelligence framework. Now that sounds like just kind of a big mouthful of words there, but what does that mean? So by geospatial intelligence framework, I basically mean not just relying on the raw model output, but combining or integrating that model output, say a field of snowpack or streamflow or soil moisture, combining that with information from the GIS world. So information about where low water crossings might be, information about critical infrastructure like power plants or school systems, things like that. It may not matter very much if you have a stream that's flowing pretty strongly that looks like maybe it's going to flood. It may not matter very much if nothing at all is around it. But if all of a sudden you realize that there's a school 10 feet away from that stream or low water crossing, something along those lines, it takes on a whole new sort of character. And finally, this choice of WRF-Hydro has also given us a centralized modeling forecasting architecture that will really support rapid infusion of new data science and technology. This is an established community infrastructure. There are international collaborators that are contributing pieces to the general WRF-Hydro framework. And certainly as we bring this into the Weather Service, we definitely see a very strong role for people out in the field, people at the water center to contribute and improve upon this model. That will be essential. So I've tossed around the acronym WRF-Hydro quite a bit, and let's talk about a little bit about what it is exactly. I guess first off, it's not WRF. It's a hydrologic modeling framework. It's not the atmospheric WRF model. It's not even just a hydrologic model. It's more of an umbrella that includes various parts. It's not dependent on a particular forcing data source or choice of land surface model, so we're not tied to any incoming precipitation source or to, say, being coupled with the WRF model. In fact, we're running in an uncoupled mode, meaning just have this kind of land surface component off on its own, simulating hydrology. There's no parent atmospheric model. We're not running in a coupled fashion. Instead, what we're doing is following this workflow down below. And what we do is we start with what we call a forcing engine. That takes an input from various NWP atmospheric models like the GFS, the HER, the RAP, the CFS. It interpolates all of those down to the underlying land surface model resolution of the system, which is a very fine grid across the country. It's 1 kilometer. And this is the NOAA MP land surface model, which we've chosen to use within the WRF-Hydro modeling framework. The function of this NOAA MP model is basically to translate incoming forcing data like rainfall, snowfall, temperature, things like that, to translate that into runoff and into energy and water fluxes. Now, going on to item 3 there, let's follow where the runoff would come out of the land surface model and then flow into number 3. We take that runoff, whether it's surface or subsurface, and we push it into a terrain routing module. This is operating on an even finer scale, 250 meters. And the reason we need to do this, as opposed to, say, atmospheric models, which operate at coarser resolutions, in order for us to really capture the stream channel networks and the underlying topography, in order to basically figure out where the water is going to go once it's on the ground, we need to operate at a very high resolution. This terrain routing module basically takes the runoff, extra water, if you will, and routes it over the surface as well as the subsurface of the soil. So there's water moving along the top of the ground and also below the ground, sideways. This then gets mapped in number 4, gets mapped from that 250-meter grid to a set of catchments. Catchments are basically small river basins. The average size of them is about 3 square kilometers across the country. There's about 2.6 million of them. We've taken these from a particular data set called NHD Plus version 2. You consider it, the term would be a hydrofabric. Basically, it's a data set that combines DEM with some derived river basins and also the stream channels themselves that can actually see where the streams flow and what basins they drain. And it's all kind of cohesive and consistent. So we map that 250-meter grid of surface and subsurface runoff into those really small basins. And the reason we do that is because a lot of our partners, such as FEMA or the USGS, the Ocean Service, a lot of them either are now or are looking forward to using the same hydrofabric, the same set of exact representations of the rivers and the basins and all the connections. So if we want to connect with their decision support tools, we need to output our products on this fabric. And lastly, once everything's been mapped into the catchments, the runoff then flows into the stream channels themselves. And this gets routed downstream and using a Muskingum-Kunj methodology. And there are an initial set of reservoirs that are represented in this implementation, this IOC. We'll be iterating on that and improving it over time to include active regulation. But for right now, it's what's called a level pool reservoir scheme, where basically we give the model knowledge of some of the basic characteristics of the reservoir. So say the height of the spillway or the size of the exit, the orifice, things like that. And when the reservoir is still up to that level, they just simply drain. Now in this chart, I'm going through the WRF-Hydro operational configuration. So somebody could have taken this model, system WRF-Hydro, and set it up basically however they wanted. We took a look at the end user requirements and decided that we really needed 4 configurations running in real time in operations. The first is an analysis and a simulation configuration. And this is not a forecast. It's using observed precipitation, MRMS, radar engaged precipitation data. And it runs hourly. And it basically, the duration is basically from 3 hours in the past up to the current time. So the reason we need to start 3 hours in the past is the line down the bottom which says a simulation of USGS observations. So basically what we're doing is, over those 3 hours in the past leading up to the present, reading in about 7,000 real-time stream gauge observations from the USGS, and we're nudging our model, the stream flow in our model towards those observations. That occurs over the 3-hour period, such that once we get to the present time, hour 0, if you will, our stream flow has been nudged towards the observed values, and we're starting out with a national analysis that is very close to the observations at those points. And more than that, we've been assimilating over 3 hours, and that means that there's been some travel time from the assimilated observations at the points, say in the first couple hours, downstream a bit. So we see the benefits of the observed data making its way into the model. We see those benefits traveling downstream, just like you can picture water flowing downstream. Well, those corrected flow values travel downstream, and now you have an analysis that's not only spot on at the observation points, but is also of high fidelity, say downstream of those observation points too. We also are going to be running 3 forecast configurations: a short range, a medium range, and a long range configuration. Short range is forced by the FIR model. That is dictated, the length of that forecast is dictated by the length of the forecast of the FIR model, which is or will be 18 hours come June after the new version is implemented. The medium range is powered by the GFS, and that goes out to 10 days. And our long range forecast, we're using 16 ensemble members from the Climate Forecast System, or CFS, to force that long range configuration. That's our only ensemble configuration here. Everything else is deterministic. That'll likely change or will change in subsequent years. We're really doing deterministic just out of necessity right now, as there are CPU limitations on the computer as well as data availability. For example, right now there is not a per ensemble, but we definitely want to shift towards ensemble techniques as we move into the future. And again, all the way down the bottom, you'll see that all these configurations have about 1,600 reservoirs represented in them, which is, again, our first kind of step towards representing reservoirs, which really have a huge impact on stream flow. We're just trying to advance the slide here. It looks like we've hit a little bit of a snag. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I wanted to spend just a minute on how we're managing the code and how we're using VLab. It's a bit of a complex situation because NCAR, who has been developing the model for years before partnership with Water Center, they have their own repository, their own code repository on GitHub. Now, we're not allowed to use or have accounts on GitHub. So what we've had to do is basically work around that a bit, and we wanted to take advantage of the VLab functionality and the VLab features. So our Water Center repository is hosted on VLab, and we're using Git. We're basically pulling the code, well, rather, NCAR is pushing the code into our repository. And once that's done, we can take the code and start porting it to the WCOS implementation standards. In other words, NCAR has a copy of WRF-Hydro that runs perfectly fine, but when you go to implement something on the WCOS supercomputer, there are a whole slew of implementation standards that you have to worry about, ranging from file name conventions to directory conventions to documentation to all sorts of things. So basically alterations to the code. So we've tackled that, and we're at the stage now where we're almost ready to hand off that ported code to Substantial Operations, or NCO. They'll take the code from our Git repository on VLab and pull it into their Subversion repository, which they have. It's kind of their pre-operational repository that they have. Once they make any changes that they need to make, that'll then be pushed back to our repository. So it's kind of three repositories right now. It's NCAR's repository, Water Center's repository, and NCO's. I do want to note that probably actually today or tomorrow, we're going to be changing from Git to Subversion in our VLab repository, and that is just to basically mesh a little more tightly with NCO's system. So what will this model be producing? Well, I guess first, before we talk about what it'll be producing, let's look to the right of the slide, the right side of the slide. And what you'll see is basically the coverage of the streamflow output points. So if you think back, I mentioned that there were about on the order of 3,600 current river forecast points now, providing very core kind of essential guidance. And what this new system will do is provide stream flow and stream velocity and other guidance at all of the blue points. It's hard to tell that they are points. It looks like basically it's just a solid fill, but it's just because they're close together. Basically, again, there are about 2.6 million of those blue points there, and you would be able to click on any one of them and call back, again, quantity set to stream flow, stream velocity, and some derived products as well. So we see this really complementing the existing coverage of the weather service points, really filling in the areas where we're lacking information right now. And if you look in the bottom right, what's happened there, and maybe you can go backwards one. So that's right now is the kind of the current density of coverage, you might say, just for a particular point in southern U.S. And what you'll see fade in is basically the denser stream network that WRF-Hydro will be simulating on. So it's quite an increase in density. Now, what are we going to be producing beyond stream flow at those several million points? Well, surface water depth and subsurface flow on the 250-meter grid, and then the whole suite of land surface output that you would expect from something running a land surface model. So that includes soil and snowpack states, energy and water fluxes, quantities of that sort. You'll see our domain in the bottom left there. It's basically the CONUS plus the contributing regions. And by that I mean that there are certain rivers near Texas and the Columbia River Basin up north that cross over into Canada, and we are basically capturing those contributing areas and then flow down into the United States. That's our stream flow domain, if you will. The whole rectangle, however, is our land surface model domain. So we won't have stream flow over that whole rectangle, but we will have things like the 1 kilometer land surface model output over that whole area. We're going to be outputting both direct raw output, so raw quantities, again, like soil moisture, heat flux, all the standard products. But I think perhaps the more important, or at least equally important quantities that we'll be outputting will be some value-added derived products. So not just straight soil moisture, but soil moisture anomalies, stream flow anomalies. Eventually, we're looking to map or basically combine information on 100-year floodplains across the country, the discharges associated with those floodplains, combine that with the forecasted discharges from our model, and from that we can gain a sense of where we're exceeding the 100-year flow, and from there, what the floodplain coverage might be from that flow. There are other other derived products you can create too. Again, maybe combining, say, knowledge of our water crossings or critical infrastructure, things like that. And that's what we'll be really working towards, building on, not just year over year, but month over month as we add products to our output surface. This is just one more illustration of an increase in forecast coverage. So this happens to be the county where I live, Howard County, Maryland. It's got about 300,000 people in it, and it's got the second largest community in Maryland. The current river forecast coverage in this area is relatively sparse, and so there are actually 0 river forecast points in this county. We'll have about 300 stream reaches after we get the model up and running, where somebody could click on this and gain guidance about what the streams are doing in this area. Zooming in a bit into that rectangle, we'll see a grid of streets overlaid, along with some irregularly shaped basins that are outlined in black. So those basins, which are basically the size of a neighborhood, are the NHD plus catchments I mentioned. There's 2.6 million catchments. And you'll see a blue flow line going through the up center, but through each catchment and draining out the bottom. And so, again, you have one stream reach or one section of stream associated with each catchment. You'll be able to query each one of those. So how are we going to distribute these products? You could obviously have this model running on the supercomputer, but it wouldn't be of much use unless people were able to access the output. So we have a 3-pronged product dissemination strategy plan. The first will be a public-facing water center website, web-based viewer. And this is what I'll call GIS-enabled. So there will be a GeoServer that the website viewer will point towards or access. And you'll be able to call up visualizations, dynamic visualizations, zoomable, subsettable by geographic region. You'll be able to call up visualizations of some core quantities such as stream flow, soil moisture, maybe a few other quantities. We're still trying to refine the list at this point. This website viewer will be very useful for a wide variety of partners, including FEMA or weather forecast offices, pretty much anybody who wants to look at the data. Now, there's a more specialized data pipeline that we'll also have, which will be directed at the river forecast centers across the country. And what we'll be doing there is subsetting our data down, sending out our products, both in terms of variable content of the files, spatial content, and we'll be pushing that out to the RFCs so that they can ingest it into their chip system. And this is going to be both inclusive of streamflow output as well as the gridded land surface products that I've talked about. And the last file or data dissemination point would be the Nomads server, which is managed by NCO. And just like you can access GFS data or HER data or any other data from Nomads, anything running operationally, you'll be able to access the raw files from WRF-Hydro on the Nomad server. There'll likely be something on the order of about a 3-day rotating archive on that system. And I should definitely mention that the files will be in NetCDF format. So unlike a lot of other models, which might be grid, this will be NetCDF. The other item that's relevant and should be mentioned is it's basically the size of the output. So given the high resolutions that we're operating at, this is the challenge, basically, is that we'll be outputting around 3 terabytes of data per day. no way we can push all of that out to, say, the WFOs or the RFCs. One of our big challenges will be to subset that data down. And looking into the future, looking beyond, say, FY17, we have potential display in AWIPs. That's certainly a potential out-year plan. And again, maybe enhancement of GIS-based hosting of WRF-Hydro output data. Who do we envision using WRF-Hydro? Well, within the Weather Service, we have different field offices, the RFCs, the weather forecast offices. This would be for river flow analyses and forecasting / flood forecasts. The National Water Center, so my own office. Eventually, we'll have operations stood up, and so this will support both forecast products and research support. Different centers at NCEP, so Environmental Modeling Center, WPC, CPC, they would all be close partners using this data for research or for input into, say, WPC's excessive rainfall forecast potentially. Also for CPC, maybe long-range guidance for drought forecasts, for example. Just have a little freeze here again. Okay. In terms of external users, so that was just the Weather Service, but there's really a wide range of external users that we're working hard to connect with. Chief among them might be the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. They need guidance of this sort to pre-position their resources so they can respond to disasters, whether it's floods or droughts, effectively. The Army Corps of Engineers are especially interested in the long-range reservoir inflow forecast. Local emergency managers and first responders can make use of the hyperlocal guidance. We've had a lot of talks with the National Ocean Service on the total water prediction effort, and this would, again, be getting at the coupled ocean estuary freshwater modeling thrust, where we're seeking to represent the total flood potential at the coast, for example. So it's not just river flooding, but it's also storm surge, and how does that combine? Also, water quality or water temperature. Those are also areas that we want to contribute to. National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, that's another partner. And academia and the private sector, too, will also be key links. So sample data. There has been a lot of talk about, a lot of queries about when we might be able to provide sample data. And the first thing I want to say is that we really definitely recognize that delivering sample data to our end users, say, especially to an initial group of evaluators at the RFCs, is vital. We've been working as hard as we can towards that, and basically what's been happening is that we've been working very hard on implementing the model, on getting the code up and running to all the standards on the supercomputer, and we're finally at a point with that now where we can devote some resources to getting some of that sample data that people have been asking for out to them. So there are some complicating factors. Again, the full data per day for each day of WRF-Hydro is basically 3 terabytes. That's going to impact the way that we would transfer it and the way that we would view that output. So that has yet to be fully worked out, and that is something that will need to be worked out with the RFCs, for example. This is also brand new data content. These are some quantities that have never been available before, certainly not operationally, to the user community and in this format. So that's also going to impact the method of viewing. And we'll have to make sure that suitable non-operational systems are located to view that data. And finally, we need to ensure proper data packaging and subsetting. Again, 3 terabytes a day is not going to work. So we need to subset that down and package the data in a readily accessible fashion. And that's, again, a conversation that we'll be having over the next month, I would say. And that's because our initial data release is targeted for early March. Sooner if resources permit. So it's not that we don't want to release it sooner. It's all about resources that we can devote to, say, the sample data versus other aspects of the project. In terms of data content, the initial plan is to draw from a multi-year retrospective WRF-Hydro run that NCAR is completing, and that is forced with NLS2 data. This is a observation-based data set, a QPE-based data set. And the reason we can't offer up, say, a reforecast is that reforecast of most of our forcing models don't exist. So in other words, we don't have a HER reforecast that we could force WRF-Hydro with for 10 or 15 years. We don't have a GFS reforecast for 10 or 15 years at the current version, at the current resolution. So the substitution for now in terms of sample data would be to draw from this multi-year retrospective data set. What we would offer up is 1 year of full CONUS output. That would be about 1 terabyte in size. And again, we'd have to subset this down, but it would be basically all the products. So the 1 kilometer LSM data and the point stream flow. And this would be at CDF format. And again, we would need to send it down. We'll also offer up, provide a 16-year time series of stream flow, thinned down to the 8,000 USGS gauge locations. So we can't provide the 16 years of stream flow, a kind of unthinned stream flow yet, but we can work up a thinned series of stream flow that we believe we'd be able to transfer out to the end users. This is to be just the first wave of sample data. There'll be multiple waves of future data releases and additional test groups that will enlarge as time goes on. But this is our initial plan. Switching gears a little bit, we've been conducting some internal evaluations of some of the forcing data sets, and this started with the QPF data. This is because the precipitation has a profound impact on our ability to simulate floods, droughts, what have you, actual accurate conditions in the stream. So we're looking very closely at performance of the HER model, GFS, CFS, other forcing sources. And I don't have these plots in here to examine closely so much as just to provide an overview of the general types of approaches we're taking to assessing the QPF. So here we have the critical success index, which is a method or a categorical measure that other entities within the Weather Service use, such as WPC, to assess precip forecast. And here we just have a distributed plot across the CONUS of the HER precip skill for hours 1, 9, and 18. Moving on, we have several other ways we can look at the precip forecasts. We can look at it seasonally, averaged over the whole CONUS, such as in the upper left, the GFS. That's also that's correlation, actually. We can look in the upper right, and again, that's CSI, as in the previous slide. But this time, instead of looking at 1 kilometer grids, we're looking at the data averaged up to HUC 8 regions. These are basically larger basins, if you will. We can look at it as a time series fashion down below, separated out by thresholds of precipitation for light all the way up to heavy precipitation thresholds. And we can even break out the ensembles. I mentioned we use 16 CFS ensemble members to force WRF-Hydro, the long-term 30-day forecast. We can break those out in a plot such as depicted in the lower left. We can compare that to an ensemble mean, say, for CFS. NCAR is also, so that's been work that's been taking place at the Water Center. Meanwhile, NCAR has been diving into evaluating some of the initial output from the development runs of WRF-Hydro. I'll emphasize that these are not complete WRF-Hydro runs in terms of they don't have all the bells and whistles that the operational version will have. For example, this is a correlation assessment over unregulated basins over a couple-year period. And the correlation values are darker. The circles darken with higher correlation values. So ideally, we'd want to see really dark circles everywhere. And in fact, we do see quite a lot of that, which is great. I'll emphasize that this does not include any data assimilation or reservoirs. This was from an earlier developmental one. So we're seeing decent performance without those two really important additions. So we'll only improve from here. They've also broken out the performance based on ecoregions, trying to see if there are variations in the model's performance based on those regions listed in the bottom right. They've noted some interesting relationships so far. And actually, sorry, you could go back one. Just a summary statistic for the map is that 71% of the basins had correlation values of greater than 0.6. This is just a sample output hydrograph that I've plucked out of the model output. This is for a point on the Mississippi. Again, this does not include data assimilation or reservoirs. This is just an initial set of model parameters, and we're seeing good performance. The black is the observed stream flow, and you can see that the line labeled 5-year simulation all routing that is tracking the observations quite well. And the difference, you'll see the taller spiky line, the one that's not quite as good. That is basically if we don't include our surface and subsurface terrain routing. on that fine 250-meter grid. But if we were to just basically take all the water, all the runoff produced by the land surface model, and just dump it into the channel. So this is displaying the importance of that really fine-scale routing process to get the timing and the magnitudes right on these split peaks. So this slide focuses on an assessment of data simulation at a particular point. We're simulating data at about 7,000 real-time gauges from the USGS across the U.S. And this is really going to help to provide improved national stream flow analyses and forecasts. The analysis that we do hourly that includes this data simulation, that creates a restart file, which all of our forecasts are kicked off from. So whether it's a short-range forecast or long-range or medium-range forecast, all of them see the benefit of this national analysis. The hydrograph down the bottom shows, again, the performance of the data simulation. The black is the observation down the bottom. You'll see a line that's basically on top of it, and that's when data simulation is activated. And the values are nudged, model values are nudged towards the observation, such that by the final time step, they're right on top of the observation. If a gauge drops out, sometimes you do see a data spike. And in fact, if we were to completely remove the gauge observations and perform no data simulation, we would get that top line there. And that is indicating, some of the biases in the model. The flows are a bit too high, and it's really the data simulation that pulls it down. If we do a leave one out type of data denial experiment, where we assimilate an upstream gauge, but we do not assimilate right at the gauge where we're validating. So in other words, we're trying to gauge the benefit from coming downstream from the upstream assimilation. If we do that, we get the middle line there, and basically it's showing that we do continue to see benefit even if we don't assimilate right at our validation point, but instead simulate somewhere around, I believe this is about 30 kilometers upstream. The complicating factor to note this plot is that it's a real-world example where there's a reservoir just upstream from this validation point. And in fact, the point where we're assimilating is above the reservoir. So basically you have the data assimilation point, and then you have the reservoir, and then you have the validation point. So it's a very challenging setup, basically. And here's just another example of what NCAR is looking into. This is the performance for data assimilation in terms of percent reduction in hourly streamflow bias. So by assimilating the data assimilation, these aren't forecasts, but just for the analysis run using observed precipitation, how much do you reduce your simulated bias when you include a streamflow simulation? And you see quite a good reduction in the bias. And this is, again, this is not validation being performed right at the gauge that you're simulating at. If that were the case, you'd see 100% reduction in bias everywhere. Instead, these are gauges that are downstream from your assimilation point. So what's the benefit of assimilating upstream? How powerful is that benefit as it flows downstream, and how does that manifest itself? So you see a nice reduction in bias across most of the country, even when you're just looking at downstream points. So this is my last slide, summary and future activities. The WRF-Hydro modeling system that we've talked about, as I mentioned, it'll be implemented in June, and it's definitely on track for that type of schedule. We have an effective three-way partnership going between the Water Center, NCAR, and NCEP, and that's leading to a very smooth implementation process. And we, right now, this week, have real-time tests, automated tests going on the NOAA supercomputer, WCOS. Those are stability tests. They're not something that, say, would be viewable for validation purposes or to look at for the quality of the simulation. They haven't been spun up. They're lacking some other things. This is just more of a software kind of end-to-end engineering checkout. I want to emphasize that when this gets implemented in June, this will provide a good number of pretty revolutionary capabilities, I think. But it's just version 1, and we have a lot more improvements on the way, a lot more areas to address. Some of these are listed below in terms of improved data simulation. We're looking at implementing hyper-resolution nested modeling windows to zero in on specific events happening, say flash floods. We'll eventually be enlarging our domain to include Canada and other parts of North America and also Hawaii. We'll be making linkages to ocean and estuary models with our national ocean service partners, and we definitely want to shift towards increased use of ensemble forcing and ensemble simulation to move away from the deterministic mode we're operating in right now. think integration into ongoing resource to operation efforts like Next Generation Global Prediction System and the EMC's NELDAS system are key. And the last point is important too. And this slide came from my AMS talk. Somebody asked me if these were just words or if I actually meant them. And I'll say the same thing again here. I wouldn't, they wouldn't be listed here if they were just words. So I really mean this. Strong partnerships with government agencies, academia, and the private sector are important to the system's long-term success. We don't want to do this in isolation. We don't want to have some sort of stovepipe system that is unaware of everything, all the other great things going on, or all the other existing forecast systems. It really needs to be a complementary system that really helps all of us in the Weather Service hydrological arena to do our jobs better. And I think I'll end with that and take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Excellent talk, both in depth and breadth. Lots of questions I have. I'm sure we have some online. John? So
far, no one has raised their hand.
Okay. Yes. So this is the point where if you, those of you on the GoToWebinar, if you'd like to ask a question of Brian, please use the raise your hand feature, and John Chattel will unmute you so you can ask your question directly to Brian. While we're waiting for that, let me start off, Brian. So if it's not using the WRF atmospheric model, why is it called the WRF-Hydro?
Yep. So that was a decision that NCAR made several years back. I think because originally it was developed as a hydrologic modeling extension for the WRF model. It could be coupled to WRF. You could use it to, you could feed the WRF precipitation into it and get higher fidelity representations of stream flow and other hydrology from that. But it's really, it can just as we're using it in a completely independent fashion, taking WRF completely out of the picture. So it's definitely a confusing misnomer, I think. But it was named a few years ago, and we're stuck with the name. So it's just a bullet that I put in all of my talks that we're not using WRF.
Okay.
Naturally, you would naturally assume that.
Sort of a Zen thing, the WRF, no WRF. Right? Yeah. Let me ask about, can you elaborate on the relationship between this and CHIPS?
Sure. So WRF-Hydro requires, for national...
Let me reframe the question. Okay. Before WRF-Hydro came along, how did CHIPS operate?
Yeah. Okay. So CHIPS runs local... So CHIPS does not run WRF-Hydro at all, obviously. It includes more local or regional models, say based on the Sacramento model or Snow 17. I know Mark can probably speak better to this than me, but it's kind of two different animals, if you will. So there's the field office-based chip systems, which produce very high fidelity, great forecast for particular basins across the country at particular points. Extremely valuable. And then we have this centralized approach, which is WRF-Hydro, kind of akin to how a local weather forecast office might have for local forecast to produce versus a GFS model running nationally or PER model running nationally. What we would envision is that our national model would be drawn in by the field offices, a WFO or a RFC, as additional guidance to use in our forecasting process. It's not meant to replace, it's not some switch that gets flipped into and that turns off chips and turns on this. It's not that at all. It's complementary. It's meant to be to provide information where we haven't had it before, provide an additional sources of useful information.
I'll add a little bit more, yeah. Brian. This is Mark Laudermans. CHIPS to this day is still a lumped model for the most part. It does have some capabilities that haven't been really fully exercised to get distributed modeling worked in, but it's still a very modern framework for a traditional lumped hydrologic model, very modern, and much like WRF-Hydro, CHIPS, by the way, is a framework of models. You can plug in your own models, whether it's a runoff model, a routing model, et cetera, into CHIPS. So CHIPS really took us to a new level by allowing that to happen for this plug-in kind of approach. It hasn't been really exploited that much, but as some of Brian's slides halfway through about showed, that CHIPS is forecasting pretty much traditional, 4,000, 5,000, depending upon how you categorize the points, locations around the country, major river mile markers and confluences, and WRF-Hydro will take that to a monstrously deeper, more detailed level using distributed modeling techniques. So, and as far as I think, Brian, in terms of what CHIPS will be able to do with it initially, it's mostly just a viewing kind of function. It's not going to like take WRF-Hydro output and somehow merge it into CHIPS modeling mechanisms. It's really just, I think, going to be using CHIPS as a viewing tool, which is powerful because we need to start looking at the comparisons and seeing how it can fill in for these smaller basins.
Right. Yeah. I'll say a couple other things. The level of service at these particular, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5,000 points, that level of service again is critical and solid. It's not the same. I don't want to say that we have 2.6 million points that are equivalent to those 36, well, 3, 4, 5,000 points. They're kind of two different animals. This is essentially kind of an objective model guidance. No forecaster in the loop, just kind of automated production across all these millions of points versus people at the RFCs focusing on these, this kind of subset of points, if you will. And I think as time goes on, we're really going to, work hand in hand and figure out what the relationship is, and that will evolve between the WRF-Hydro and CHIPS and other aspects of the field. And that's something that we're definitely going to basically figure out as this goes forward.
Okay. John, do we have any?
Yes, Jim Brewster would like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, hi, Brian, and everyone. Just a comment, really, a couple of comments. Maybe I didn't quite pick up on the timing of the release of this to the core partners, and maybe it's more of an evolutionary thing, but from your presentation, you said June, this will go operational. So given the fact that, the RFCs, field offices will have to take a look at the data and implement it with the chips, I can actually see if you're releasing this, say, to FEMA, and they start using it in packages and decision tools, and we're in this evolutionary phase, I can almost guarantee you, just by the way, you're using the HER and other, model sets, and then the RFC QPF goes into their models, there's going to be possible confusion here that we're all going to have to mitigate out in the field with perhaps, point X from RFC, B says 20 feet, and WRF-Hydro is coming in at the same point that maybe FEMA sees or another partner with a few feet difference, high or low. That's really going to be a problem. So I don't know if you're jumping out right away. I guess that's my question: is how quickly will these partners be getting the real-time data, and how quickly do we have to adjust to these potential pitfalls that are coming?
Right. No, that's an excellent point. I agree with what you say. I think communication is going to be really key, perhaps even more important than usual, with these products coming out to try and mitigate and avoid, where possible, exactly the situation you're describing. Again, the implementation date is June 14th, and what that means is that 30 days prior to that, if anybody's familiar with the standard NCO implementation process, there'll be a 30-day public test of this, where people can access this data and assess it. So even in May, they would be able to start looking at it to make comments on it before it's actually implemented June 14th. So prior to that, again, we were targeting the beginning of March to get at least the RFCs, some initial sample data, to get used to it, to work out any kinks, answer any questions. But it's a super compressed time schedule, and it's just kind of what we're, it's the box we're in, and we're trying to make the best of it. But I fully agree that it creates some complications, just like you're describing, and we're going to have to just work together to make sure the message is as clear as possible. Because come June, the data, it will be public. Once something's implemented on WCOS, it goes out. Mark, did you want to?
I was going to add something, Brian. Jim, those are good comments. I used the word operational in June. I don't know if that's really a fair word. I mean, it's operational. It's producing public products, but I believe wouldn't there still be some designation that these are experimental products?
That's a good point. Yes,
and that's a very official designation.
It's operational. It's maybe it's word semantics, but it's it's an operational. It'll be running operationally on the WCOS computer, meaning it has operational support. It'll be 24/7, what have you. But yes, I'm glad you brought it up. There will be a label, if you will, attached to these products that say these are preliminary or experimental. I don't know what. I don't want to word out there.
Something. I mean, I compare it to like today. The web server is practically crashing because people are looking at the 4 to 7 day experimental winter products.
No, so that's a good point. It will be running operationally, but we will be very clear in that these are initial products that people should, these are not the official Weather Service
take action.
Exactly. People should not be making life and death decisions with these initial products.
So, Jim and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the RFC forecast that goes to the WFO to disseminate still will serve as our official statement on public response.
Yeah, while we're in this initial phase, until we've the field and water center and headquarters have sorted everything out until that's done. Yeah, that would it would be the official word. Thanks for bringing that up. That's really good clarification.
Thank you, Jim. John, do we have someone else?
No additional questions at this point.
Bob, Jim.
Yeah. You said you had 250 meters. That, I believe, is exactly 1/10 of the NDFD. Do you actually produce a grid, or are you stuck with points and so forth?
We produce a grid of the land surface quantities like soil moisture and snowpack, and also a grid of other variables like the excess water on the top of the surface. The only things we're stuck with points would be the routed products like the stream flow and stream velocity, but we do have grids for everything else.
So do you intend to put this into the NDFD?
No, not initially. At least I'm not aware of any plans to link that in this. Certainly not for IOC. I don't know about the out-year plans, but we're keeping.
That's why not.
Well, at least for right now, we can. It's all we can do just to get this implemented up and running on the grid. Maybe in year 2 or 3. I know we would want to merge, this source of hydrology with, looking into the future, merge this with any and all other sources into one kind of cohesive database, whether it's NDFD or something else. I don't know how that's done, but it's a good point. But it's not in our initial plan.
Setting the stage.
So, yeah.
Okay, another question. You're using NetCDF instead of GRIB. Is that did you all analyze this very carefully, or is this more a matter of who developed it?
It's both actually. So NetCDF. So the system was developed using, within NetCDF output enabled. That's kind of standard for output at NCAR and in the scientific community for hydrology. I would say there's a lot of use of NetCDF. GRIB, I would say, is more heavily used in the atmospheric community, and so we looked at the sizes, the file sizes we would get with GRIB versus NetCDF. We looked at the amount of work it would take to change from NetCDF to GRIB output model code. We looked at what was allowed and wasn't allowed in WCOS. We kind of combined all that to come up with the most efficient path forward to stick with NetCDF.
Okay, we got to wrap up pretty soon, but I got a couple other quick ones. So you get the gold star for using the VLab and all that, but NCAR's in GitHub and VLab's in Get, and then unfortunately you have to go to SVN because NCO on the WCOS side is still Subversion, so we got to fix that. Great reminder why we have to fix that, because everything should be Git. That there's no question about. On the medium range, your meteorological, your QPF, so you don't have bias corrected GFS output. You had it on the
right.
So I mean the blend, MOS,
So a few things there. So we need gridded input data. It needs to be, if we can get it, it really needs to be hourly. And actually the GFS is going to hourly in its next upgrade out to 5 days, which is great for us. Hourly QPF from the GFS. The blend, we talked to some of the blend folks, Kathy Gilbert, about the blend going forward, and in the future we did see some crossovers where we could use that in the future. but for right now, their time window that they were offering products over and the quantities that they were going to provide, the variables they were going to initially provide, didn't meet our forcing needs. So that, eventually that's definitely a forcing source that we would want to examine once the time frame is from the blend is not correct, but once it aligns with our needs. Resolution is an issue. What resolution will all that be produced on? What's the temporal resolution too? But yeah, that's definitely a direction we want to head in. The reason we're not doing GFS bias correction is in part because matter of resources. Again, this was an accelerated project, and we could only get so much done for the IOC. Also, as a matter of what was available for a long-term sort of data set that we could use to correct the GFS, but mostly it was that we had to formulate this for the maximum impact in the time that we had.
Okay. And one last quick one. So you're using you got the MRMS in there,
yep.
And so they've got the flash thing,
yep. Yep.
And so this obviously could do flash flood if you can crank it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there going to be a merger of those?
It's a good question. So yeah, so the NSSL's flash system, like you said, will be as part of the MRMS, I guess, umbrella, will be implemented from what I know in a bit. And that's more of a nowcasting tool where it uses QPE to run a national streamflow model, and then does not, for this implementation that they'll be doing, it does not use QPF. They may or may not let the model run for 6 hours into the future just to see, basically route the water down the stream and see where it goes, but there's no additional rainfall happening in 6 hours. So they're kind of if we each have a niche, if you will, their niche would be situational awareness, kind of nowcasting, something that's updated every 10 minutes, how Casper can be updated. Ours is more forecast-oriented. We do have a nice update, every hour, decent for flash flooding situations even. But it's really the forecasting capability and the streamflow data assimilation capability which gives us a good analysis also. Now, to get to the second part of your question, so right now we kind of fill 2 separate niches. There are some beginning plans, if you will, to figure out how we can merge the 2 in the future, because it makes a lot of sense. And so I've been talking to NSSL about that, and both recognize the need, for that sort of work.
All right. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Brian. Really appreciate this talk. And again, it'll be uploaded to the VLab forum website after this, so you can share it, everyone, with your colleagues. Just a quick reminder, coming up in February, I have Melissa Petty from GSD, I think, talking about Insight. In March, we got Tropical Cyclone Wind Tool, Jonathan Blaze, and then in April, US WRP project also out of GSD. Ensemble-based hazard detection guidance tool. So thanks everyone, and see you next month.
All right, thanks very much.